First of all, thanks so much for taking the time, Tommy.
No problem.
That's great.
Thank you, yeah.
This is just like to document a few jazz guitarists that live around Ireland, Dublin in particular for the moment. And you're one of the people who are the longest around and the most important in that. And that.
Yeah, maybe that's a pity. I'm the longest around, yeah. But that's the situation at the moment. Yeah.
Good. I just wanted to start quickly from where your life with music kind of started. I read up on your page. You're originally born in Derry.
Correct, yeah.
And then it says your career musically started in the late 70s with it quickly goes into with lessons from Louie Stewart.
Yes, I got about 6 lessons from Louie Stewart. That was interesting how it started. I remember my sister brought me down to Rogers and Keys, Kelly's of the Keys, the first time I saw Louie playing, you know. But the interesting thing, I wasn't really interested in jazz, but he was playing a song by the Monkees, which was a popular, the songs were quite popular at the time, you know, Take the Last Train to Clarksville, and he had this arrangement of it, you know, and of course that was very impressive to me, especially when it wasn't a jazz tune as such. He did an arrangement. Found out afterwards it was from a record called White Rabbit by George Benson, and he'd taken it, you know, he just did the arrangement. So that was quite impressive, just hearing that, and then I thought, okay, so I asked him for lessons.
When you were saying you weren't necessarily interested in jazz when you met him first,
no, I wasn't.
What were you listening to?
Oh, well, I was listening to other kinds. I grew up listening to the Beatles. I loved the Beatles, and Hendrix, of course, any guitar player, Cream, groups like that. And Derry, the time when I grew up, there was a lot of trouble. There was the troubles in Derry and all that, you know. And there were people that were playing that kind of, I suppose they saw Hendrix's group as kind of revolutionary, or, you know, sort of against anything that was considered establishment or anti-establishment, you know. So we were all part of that. I think the jazz, I heard jazz in my brothers had a collection of Duke Ellington, you know, and I was listening more to the Hollies, Cream and all that, but he would play Bach and he'd play a bit of this jazz, you know, and I thought it was terrible stuff at the time, you know. But my mother, I remember my other brother, he brought a record of Wes Montgomery, and I still have it, the cover to this day, you know, which was a compilation cover of Wes Montgomery, and it was called Go. I mean, it had nothing to do with the music, and it showed you this girl advertising these jeans at the time for the 1950s, 60s, you know. But it was a compilation of all, and he was playing bass guitar on one of the tracks, but it wasn't coming. So you could imagine it was just one of the publicity songs. Because he did play these kind of popular, the day in the life afterwards Beatles songs, so that was part of that, you know. So gradually getting into hearing and coming back to listening to some jazz, yeah. Because prior to that I was in the seminary. You know, yeah. Could you imagine? Yeah, it was interesting in point of view of music from Gregorian chant and things like that you heard well, you know. But and I didn't really play the guitar, you know. He played a couple of chords, like learning a couple of Beatles songs. However, there wasn't really the learning how to improvise and things like that. The interesting thing about maybe the seminary, you did hear a lot of church music and Gregorian chants, and that sort of that was interesting, you know, because sometimes you can, you know, like people like Debussy used a lot of those when they were trying to write something original. They went back to these olden styles, and then you heard those kind of modes, and of course jazz musicians use those as well, you know. So some of it was kind of latently there at the back of my mind, you know.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
And even just before that, how did you pick up the guitar in the first place? Was someone in your family playing? Or?
My brother played, yeah, and I got into trouble once because he had bought a guitar for Christmas and I could try to play it, and he found out there was a string missing or something happened, and accused me because there were 8 of us in the family. So of course I was blamed, and you know, he gave me a terrible hiding at that time, so I decided I wouldn't touch that again. I'd turn my mind to other more sport, for example. I used to play a bit of football and all that, yeah. So it wasn't, in a sense, I didn't come from a non-musical environment. There were examples of my sister, my brother, taking piano lessons. You know, I never did. It's funny, the last, I was the youngest, and half of them were all passed away by now. And so the one person who still continued music was myself, and they all gave it up, you know, and they got official lessons. I didn't, you know, except from Louie. I did when I came to Dublin then, and I did I did a diploma just in harmony, classical harmony, with Walter Beckett, who was a great teacher, but it was just Bach's music, you know, chorale, things like that, just classical, yeah.
Oh, so when you, at the time when you said you didn't have as a child formal lessons
Yeah.
as such, only some of your siblings, when you met up for Louie for those
Yeah.
first couple of lessons,
Yeah.
how was that? Because he, like a jazz
Yeah,
guitarist playing,
yeah.
and
He
you
said
come
play
from-
for me, and I said I couldn't. I sang by the time I get to Phoenix, you know, and he did an arrangement of that for me. He said, "Oh," he said, "Okay." That was interesting. Yeah, I could imagine. I'm by the time I get, and he said, "Oh," and I still have it written out somewhere where he did the arrangement. He wrote. Actually, it's unusual in that he would write it out, you know, very, very blandly. You know, he'd like the notes, blah blah blah, and then he'd play the chords, you know, and. I kept that. It was a great souvenir, and I still have it. Actually, his arrangement of that. Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And did you obviously? Well, you kind of answered the next question. I was wondering, looking back, did you get a lot out of those 6 lessons, or was it maybe too far, or was he?
No, I think it was interesting because that's the time when I probably getting married. I was married, yeah, sorry, and I think I was nearly getting divorced because any time he played, I would hang out, and he would say, "Oh, good Lord, you're not going to hear him again tonight." But and it generally what happened where if I had a class, I would pinpoint some things he played, and I would remember. It was only later when I got a Sony Walkman I decided to record him without him knowing about it. Just, you know. But I wasn't smart enough at the time, however. And in that case, I would say to him, "Oh, you played this such and such," you know, and he would try to. If I got the song, it would be behind. So if he played "The Days of Wine and Roses," a song around, I'd say, "You played something there. What was it?" And then he would, and then he would do his own version. And while we were there, it would come up, you know. I remember a very good class. I was interested in Around Midnight by Thelonious Monk, and he did an arrangement of that for me for the guitar, you know. So I learned chordal melody. I didn't really learn a lot about improvising, you know, because I thought it was the learning the sound of jazz chords and the voicings that's because when you do, as you know yourself, if you come from a rock tradition, you know, they're basically majors, which sound great, you know, and all those extension chords, you know, just to hear them and to get your ear to hear them, and that was the thing I was really checking out with Louie, and it was great to have somebody there actually playing it, and you could hear it, and also the way he used them, you know. So he was a phenomenal player at that time because there was nobody of that kind of vintage and prowess could play so well that music at the time. There were a couple of pianos. Jim Doherty played, and Noel Keelan played, and a few people. John Wadham. John Wadham probably was my greater influence than Louie when I started to play because I had to learn to play in a group. Louie was great learning guitar, you know, jazz guitar, yeah, if you like, yeah.
John Bonham is actually on this list as well.
All right, okay, yeah.
The questions,
yeah.
so we get to that.
Yeah, quite no problem, yeah.
The next 2 things I have written down is like, it's from your website as well, a bit of research, is like, there was 2 bands named, one of them was called Jump, and
Yeah.
one of them was called None.
Yeah.
Kind of two early bands of yours
Yeah.
where you were involved, and both of them had kind of like, now fusion is kind of a market word
Yeah.
for something
Yeah,
else,
it is,
but
yeah.
they were both fusing different elements of music than
Yeah.
jazz.
Yeah. None was with Brian Dunning. Well, he was flute player still playing today, you know. So that was very much jazz with Irish music, and it went well. You know, we played gigs and it was popular. And Jump was more a fusion rock, jazz rock. You know, Mike Nolan was that. We used to play on a Monday, if I remember correctly, in Slattery's. Slattery's was a great place because Louie used to play on a Wednesday or something. And then upstairs, a big band of Rock Fox used to play Duke Ellington. And then on a Friday, you had, I think, Noel Keelan, you know, so it was like 4 or 5 days of jazz, you know. And then upstairs, when the jazz wasn't on, you had groups like Planksty, good kind of Irish bands at the time, you know, so it was a place to be. It was a terrible place, you know, but you could hear very good music.
The next thing I have written down here was a person you already mentioned, John Wadham. In your first trio with him and Ronan,
Yes.
or maybe not the first trio, but the first big.
Yep, probably the better trio that we were playing more regularly, you know, was with John Wadham, and I of course went to hear him play because he was a kind of legend even, and of course living around here, he lived in Dalkey as well, so I used to see him as well, you know, while the sight coming along with the cigar and the pipe or whatever, you know. So he was an impressive character, and then hear him play, and then we got this. It was Ronan Gilford. He was young at the time playing bass, and we started a trio. The unfortunate thing, I think, because we started playing on a Sunday, and the time we could play in the Focus, Louie Stewart had unfortunately, he had a gig at the same time, so it was a choice of whether people would come to hear us or. And most, of course, they all went to hear Louie Stewart. The nice thing about the Focus Theatre was that it was a sit-down, it wasn't a pub, and it was a theatre. And even though we just got a couple of people, it was interesting because we built up the trio then. I started to write a couple of tunes, and Ronan started to write. That's where he started becoming a composer as well there, you know. And the Wad was great. We called him the Wad because his time feel was so good. And I think there, from the point of view, having Louie teaching me just guitar voicings and teaching the jazz guitar, Johnny really taught me how to play in a group setting, you know, how to swing, how to get a sense of a good swing and things like that. And also form was very important, you know. If you missed the bridge in a tune, you know, you got this terrible you look of like that you just had it almost like you were just rattling, was he going to speak to me after the gig, you know? And he might turn around and say, it had its moments, Dad, especially the last one, as if to say, you know, you played a lot of, you know, before that or whatever. But he was greatly instrumental in my career as just playing the music. Yeah, John Wadham, I have to say, yeah.
Did you have, with that trio, did you have any a trio you got inspiration from particular, or like something we want to try to do what they doing, or was it none of this?
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking back on it now. I would probably think that no, I didn't. There wasn't. It was later, of course. I think the first was just playing. We were just trying standards, doing small little arrangements. Not really. We did rehearse up in Johnny's. He was great. Johnny's house, and that was great. I was still teaching full-time English literature. Ronan was working a delicatessen, you know, a shop, you know. So John was free. Of course, he was a professional, worked in RT and all, you know. I think the formation of saying we're basing our trio on another great trio or guitar trio, you know, no. That came for me, I think, when I met John Abercrombie, or at least when I started becoming more interested on, if you like, guitar players who weren't strictly jazz guitar players, you know. I mean, in the tradition of Wes Montgomery, Tal Farlow, Joe Pass, those particular guitar players who were coming from rock, maybe like Abercrombie, Schofield, or people like that then. And especially, I have to say, there was a period that I was really into John McLaughlin, and that came later, you know. That whole idea, just pre-Mahavishnu, you know, extrapolation and playing the acoustic. You know. I really got into that, you know, and I wasn't even aware how difficult it was to play in odd meters. I just listened to it, and you know, you picked it up at the end because this is like, you know, all YouTube clips and you can checking it out, or people doing transcription and all. My transcriptions were just playing the thing over and over again with in an awful machine, you know, things like that. They did. That's what I was saying to my own students today. It did help your ear. You developed a great ear, and it also playing with those. There was no music. You didn't produce a piece of music on the stand playing with John Wadham. So you had to memorize a lot of standards. You also had to play in such a way that it was just the whole format of you had to nail the changes. If that wasn't right, you just, nobody asked you again to play. It was as bad as that. The 70s, yeah, because there was kind of, probably this is true, and I hope it's not, there was kind of monopoly of the jazz scene, and I suppose if you had somebody that calibre, Louie, then nobody wanted to hear anybody else. And there were guys coming up. I was coming a little bit older. There was Dave O'Rourke, places like that, and the younger Hugh Buckley and all that used to come to me. We were all at the listening to Louie and just being totally influenced, because here was somebody you could hear live as opposed to listening to records. And anybody who was promoting the music, they were immediately compared to Louie, and so that was unhealthy, I thought, for the time. However, I stayed in that, and I think the first time I moved to played in Portugal. I think that was the first time I realised they didn't know Louie Stewart over there. So then I started developing at least what I thought was an individual style on my own then, yeah.
Okay, because first time when you were away and he wasn't there as a big reference?
He wasn't a big reference or a comparison between that, It was an Irish guy brought me over, Bryan Trench. He was a critic at the time, just like McGill or one of those magazines, and he says, I know this guy Eduardo and you should play, they've got a lovely club. And I still go back. I mean, I was there last year again, so I kept that contact, I used to say sometimes if I played in Arthur's, we had only so many people, whereas if I played in Portugal, it would be packed. They sort of knew me better out there. But that's changing, But I think the movement towards learning or developing your own individual voice and guitar started when I just moved out of Ireland to, where people didn't judge you in comparison with somebody else. You got your own, developing your own. Even though it wasn't necessarily, an amazing earthquake of just, a new style completely, you just were trying to, even playing standards, even just to play them a different reharmonizing or playing different arrangements and things like that. And it was only later when I heard, as I say, people like Abercrombie and all that, there was just, they were coming from, their music was like me, CM, Pat Metheny, just an opening up of different ways of playing the music. Yeah. How did you
get, you mentioned him twice now, how did you get to meet John Abercrombie?
John came to the school, it was actually the start of, I think it was 83, 84, Alan Smith put on Jazz on the Terrace. Now it wasn't Abercrombie, but it was the beginning of bringing, if you like, it was George Coleman and people like that, Tommy Flanagan, and they would invariably come and play with us, which was great, but also teach, begin to teach. And then the next time Alan, then I think it was next year after, there was, it was headed something like John Abercrombie in Ireland, where he played with Richie Buckley. I played duet with him, and he came and taught in the school, and he played with Ronan as well, so, that the school was open to any guitar player. Luke Hugh was there a lot, and Abercrombie. That's how I met him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from just what you were touching on there before, it's a very interesting kind of concept of the. I think there's a Pat Metheny quote from when he was young. He tried to play like Wes Montgomery a lot, and then he got given out for doing that.
Yeah.
And you said very similar. As soon as you moved out, or moved somewhere else, not moved, but been somewhere else, and the reference wasn't there.
Yeah.
There was a bit of a change in your own playing. How do you communicate that to your students? Do you try to bring them towards their own style, but still learn the?
Well, you have to influence. Influence has always been very part of it. Well, it's part of everybody. No matter if you're a writer or any art form, you're influenced by tradition, and by tradition means that learning tradition first in order to alter it. I mean, if you don't know the tradition, say you're saying, oh well, I'm playing, in the style of Ornette, that means at least you've studied Ornette, But you get students say they don't even know who John Coltrane is actually. Well, because maybe if they were born somewhere, but if they're playing jazz, when we call it jazz music, I think I think the great players have studied the great tradition, you know, but I think because if they're more profound in understanding the tradition, they know how to break away from it. You know, it's been done before very well. So, for example, you get a young guitar player and he's saying, you know, I want to play like Charlie Parker. Fine, but you will say, well, you know, when you listen to the great guitarists and even Halferty, all those Jimmy Rainey, he did it so well, you know. And they say, well, about try to find your own style. And then this is the whole thing about, you know, having an individual voice. Some people prefer to stay. Don't get me wrong. I mean, stay very solidly in the tradition. You know, I mean, Louie would never, obviously, decide to use light gauge strings or bend strings the way as like even contemporaries of him, like Jim Hall, might do. But then Jim Hall was a much more open spirit in the music. So it's got to do with character. It's got to do with personality, and that's it. So people decide to stay in. People decide to go out. You know, it's a harder. It's maybe. I mean, you know, the kind of music playing today. I mean, it's the greatest hybrid form of music today in jazz because it brings in everything. It doesn't. You can have hip hop, you can have whatever, you know. Yeah. So it's always been that movement. Maybe that's what keeps it going. Maybe that keeps it. You know, I would be of the opinion that you do have to inject some new stuff into an old form in order to make it survive against all odds. You know.
Then we move on from there to something I asked Hugh Buckley when I did an episode with him, and it was for me as someone who comes from a different country, I'm very much interested in the history of Dublin or of Ireland. How did you find the jazz scene when you first entered it? When you said you had like your Sunday gig, and Louie was kind of the guy.
Yes, yeah.
How would you compare that to what it become now?
Oh yeah, well it's much better. It's healthier now. You know, in terms of there are more places to play. The younger students, I suppose that they could be, they can find places to play. You have the whole thing, you know, about Facebook, the possibility of information is just ready available for that, you know. The 70s, there were only a couple, I mean, there were Slattery's basically. Now, I know there's Arthur's now, but I mean, if Arthur doesn't work, I think you can always hire a place or take on board the possibility if you think your music and you've got a group, you'll find a place to play, you know. And people will come out, people want to hear. It's just a more healthier scene in terms of the monopoly of the music in the 70s has kind of disappeared. Maybe because, again, those older guys were, I won't say use the word scared, but maybe just they like to feel that was their, I think they were maybe the founders or the leaders in that kind of field, and then they felt that their position was insoluble and that they didn't want anybody encroaching on there, you know. So any new star would come along, they'd be wary of them. Is he a piano player or a guitar player? No. Louie never felt that, and maybe it's because he probably didn't think there was anybody on his, you know, or that was fair enough. Maybe other bass players and piano players and all that, they might have felt a little bit, covetous of their own position. I'm the star here, you know, and were not as willing to open up channels of communication with the lesser known musicians, you know. I have to say in favour of Louie, at least he taught students, which is always great, and John Wadham did that as well. I mean, Connor, Stephen Q, all the great drummers that, you know, that generation were all taught by John Wadham, you know. And irrespective of his method of teaching, which would be, you know, could be questionable in any, even Louie's questionable. You would never call him a teacher as such, you know. He just said, that's the way I do it, that was it. Take it or leave it, you know. But at least you were exposed on a one-to-one basis, which was amazing at that time, because there was nothing for you. It was revelation through records. That was the only other possibility to learn the stuff, you know. So, however, I think it's much healthier now, to answer your question, and students are much more aware, or people playing the music like yourself, you know, they're much more aware of how to deal with the situation. I think the other aspect too, back in the 70s, if you were married, had a family, or, I mean, the idea of being a jazz musician was just one of these, you were a hobo from nowhere. You didn't have any and, you know, you had no identity in a way. This music was a minority. It was also looked down as in form of the kind of the Catholic country, devil's music and all that, such and such, playing those awful flat five chords, you know. Yeah, you know. So, I mean, it was that kind of situation, you know. And if you were good, I mean, it was amazing that the 80s, or when I started moving, I had a French group then in the 80s, you know. When Cork started, I played with Lee Conus and people like that, and then all of a sudden you realise, wow, I mean, they don't see it like that at all. Here you're coming from a totally sort of, almost like an entrenched society saying, you know, this is the devil's music, be careful, you know. And if you were trying to play it professionally, if you wanted to buy a house, you couldn't because you couldn't get a mortgage because that kind of work is not the same. All that, now that's all changed, and for the better.
Yeah.
And I think so, yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of students, you said students there. I was wondering if the lessons like you got from Louie Stewart and maybe from John Wadham on the bandstand, did that influence your own style of teaching? Because in my experience, when I had lessons with you, I came from Germany and I came very much from the book. Like I would know a chord and I could tell you a song, but a lesson with you was always with a guitar in hand, and it was like, let's play that tune. And then it didn't sound good like when I played it, but it was a really good experience because it was always about, let's actually do something, like let's play the music.
Well, absolutely, yeah. Now, that's a great thing about, I mean, even with Louis, he mightn't be able to explain things, you know, but when you hear him play it, you know, and if you record it and things like that, you know, then that's for me, that's something that stuck with you because the sound, you heard the sound of the music, you know, because that's what it is. I mean, and remember, when you're talking about the 70s, around that period, jazz music was ear music. Jazz music was something that you could hear and play it, and you had to be very conscious of that on the stage, because if things happened and you weren't hearing it, you know, you weren't asked back. Not as bad as that, but you know, the good, you know, and things, and that's the way it happened, you know. Did you hear what I played there? And that's right. By playing it, that taught me, in any playing situation, it could be a different situation in terms of what happened, or you play something differently and all that. Did you hear it? Did you react to it? And I found that too with people like Lee Conus. You know, you had to be able to just hear instinctively what happened, spontaneously on the spot, and that was very hard. How to teach that is very difficult, but what you do, the more you play with it, at least you're aware of it more, and that's all in terms. And that's what was one of my methods of teaching it.
Yeah, do you think the students you had, like you were teaching obviously a long time in New Park, still now in DCU, did students change? Did you see it change in students over the years? You know, were they more interested in different things back then, or were they learning different towards now?
I think they're more exposed. I think the older students I had were, they were kind of uniformly wanted to go one way. You know, they just wanted to learn how to play standards well, or jazz music, and really play through the changes. You know, there's more. They're now more exposed to different ways of doing this, a different style. Stylistically, that's one thing. And then if you think about harmonically jazz music and all that, I mean, it has a man. And I think if they are more aware of what's happening out there, you know, what's happening, the new groups and what the way they're dealing with music. I suppose in the 70s it was, you know, if you had people like Abercrombie and Pat Metheny, or maybe, or even Bill Frisell, people like that, they were still quite young. And if you just talk about jazz guitar, I'm not even talking about other, you know, great jazz musicians. And I think then it's when they really consolidated their style, you know, and realised then from there, their style came like Rose and Winkler. You had the new guys coming after that, you know. So it was much more, I suppose, in a way, going one way in the 70s, and now there are different multi ways of trying to play this music now, and that's there for them now in many ways, you know. And I think they're more exposed to that, and they like to play that way.
One of the big things, because we talked earlier about your trio in the 80s with Ronald Gilfine and John Wadham. The most gigs I seen you play nowadays in the last 5 to 6 years was probably a trio as well.
Yeah.
This time with Kevin Brady.
Yeah, Kevin and Dave Redmond. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it about the trio that is what kind of draws you to it and keeps you going with it?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I have a trio in France as well. It's an organ trio, but the fact the concept of three musicians is always interesting. I think solo, I never really took to solo playing. And somebody said that just recently, I played in Galway Jazz Festival last year, and it's the first time I was asked to play a solo, which I did with great reluctancy and difficulty, and I found, because I I've never took to that. Okay, duos I could take. I didn't mind doing a couple of duos, and I say one of the great duo I'd work with, as I say, is Norman Winston. Well, that's a singer, but it's an amazing duo. Okay, the trio for me was always I love the concept of a three-way example of improvisation in terms of how you could just have enough. In terms of like the outer structure, inner structure working together. What I mean by that, maybe if it's like a concept of a theme, and different ways of playing it. Now, in jazz, I suppose basically a guitar trio. You're thinking of all the great trios. I'm writing something this at the moment. I mean, if you take a rock trio like the great Cream and Hendrix and all those people, basically they're still improvising. I thought that was a great line. Jack Bruce said, Ginger and I, we never told Eric that we're really a jazz group, and we just kept improvising. And in many ways, Hendrix improvised, he would decide. So, I mean, I think, and I was used to hearing a lot of guitar trio, and I was always listening to the Bill Evans trio, and it was all seemed to be trios was what I wanted to do. And I think maybe I'm still, Abercrombie trio, the Gateway, and all that, and Pat Metheny, that early stuff for Pat Metheny, it was a trio, And I think the fact is, it's you have to create harmonically as well. That's the guitar from the front part. Then the bass is a single line. So which means that you can play with that as well, and the drummer can suggest all sorts of colours behind that. So while it is more difficult, a trio, in terms of creating interesting lines, as opposed to a quartet with you've got piano playing chords behind you, it's more challenging. And I try to always rise to that sort of challenge in terms of like it works or it doesn't work, or and I like that one, Quartets, I always find playing in a quartet, I find it very, very, I'm not the same guitar, I don't play the same way. And in duets I probably kind of more busy playing duets, or I try to, because it's only two instruments or whatever, So I think a trio gives me a little bit scope, at the same time, just interesting ways of dealing with it, in terms of colours, And the ones I did with Lou Ronan were more rhythmic. The ones I used with Kevin and Dave, kind of a little bit more open. The French one, even with organ, it's still a different kind of opening way of harmonic. Not necessarily one, just using colours, because Christophe Laverne plays a lot of he used bells and he uses all sorts of things like that. And so you're trying to experiment to see if it works or not, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Okay. Only two more questions, and then we're pretty much there. One is about, you mentioned it earlier very briefly, you mentioned you were teaching English literature.
Yeah.
And that's kind of still a theme. When I was on your website, there is essays published. One was Adorno's view on jazz in 48 or 49.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a big fan.
No, he wasn't, no.
And because he felt it was, if I understood it correctly, he felt it was stuck.
It was perennial fashion. It joined up with the fashion of the day. Maybe because all he heard was that glum, 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 4/4 time, was just, that their 30s and 40s, he was listening to that kind of jazz. I just happened to say in that, I said at the end, maybe if you listen to some of the stuff that the jazz is happening today, you might have been a little bit more sensitive to the cause, yeah. However, he was a great critic. Yeah, I wrote a thing on when I was studying my English. Yeah, I did Marxist literary criticism of contemporary works like Joyce and people like that back. I got into more Adorno's books on philosophy of modern music, things like that. Yeah, and I also wrote things like on Shakespeare, stuff like that as well. I did a little on jazz, and as a result of that, I suppose the thing I did on Camus as well, Albert Camus, that was based on my readings. Yeah. And literary aspects.
How did that passion of you start when you were younger?
I probably from the seminary, readings from there at that time, I used to read beside all the stuff you're supposed to read, all the literature of, like Joyce and all that. At the same time doing theology, what I was supposed to do in philosophy, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, all these people, trying to look at, and I suppose in the French as well, you get ideas about, what do you think, okay. So, and that could become in a literary form, it could be just philosophical, like treatise or things like that, and then poetry as well. So I think if you are, there people say that, where do you draw your influences from? People say, oh, I paint, like Danny Humer, famous French drummer, or I get it from, I just listen to other music. Sometimes for me it comes from literature, or it comes from writings, ideas, yeah. So that's always been there for a while,
Cool. And the last question is always, I ask something for people who watch that sometimes, because a lot of young guitarists watch that online. And I don't know if that was in your generation the same kind of part, but sometimes I know in my generation of jazz guitarists, people are not obsessed with gear, like with guitars and amps, but it's a huge part of the thing, and like custom built arch tops are a thing for a lot of money, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's beautiful instruments, beautiful guitars. I always felt you had a very, very simplistic approach, though. I think most of the times I've seen you with a Gibson ES
335, 335, yeah.
Is there any reason why you stuck to one guitar for a long time and had this?
No, I like that guitar. It's very economical guitar. You could play fusion well on and jazz, and the arch tops I always found had one particular sound, I had an old 175, I found that when I was changing a bit, when I went away, I needed a different, I used heavier gauge strings, and that's what you did, and then, so I thought for lighter gauge strings and the whole just opening up, I got the 325 for that purpose, okay. I'm very happy with that. I mean, if I have to play acoustic stuff, I just use that. That's great. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you could experiment, and it mostly comes from the amp. So, and this is the amp I'm using, and it's the best. It's the old Boss, because there's so much on it. I get fed up trying to use pedals. I saw the worst example of that when Bill Frisell played the first time in Ireland. He had his pedal up on a stool like that, and he was playing, and he kept pressing them, but it wasn't working. So I thought, sometimes it's on the ground, it's easier to control and all that. And a lot of guitar players use pedals. I love it when the pedals are, or at least the sounds you want, are on the amp, where you can just go or program it on. That's handy. So it's just a means to an end, A simplistic approach, I think it's more you get a sound that you're happy with. And then you just live with that, and you try to play accordingly, or at least you I think the sound, and once it's there and you're happy with that sound, all the stuff that you write, comes from that sound in your head, I think a lot of students experiment because there's so much stuff out there, they haven't settled, and that is true. There are more things, more examples of different sounds, I want to sound this, my guitar sound like a jet aeroplane, fair enough, or I want to make sound like, whatever, and that's got away from that dry sound that young guitar players hate when they hear people like, maybe Louie or Tal Farlow or Joe Pass. It's a very dry, it's just one sound all the time, and they say, why not use the technology that's available for it? Okay, why not? Yeah. But I think if you haven't got, I think we can still talk about an Abercrombie sound sometime. We can talk about a Pat Metheny sound, So it is there in terms of guitar players still have a sound, or Bill Frisell sound, So I think then my sound is just, I think, very simple and straightforward. My sound.
Okay, perfect. I think that's it from my side. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was great. And now we play a tune. And
okay,
that's it.
Fine. Yeah,
Thank you very much,
yeah, okay. Pleasure.
A tune?
Yeah.
Maybe you mentioned the Days of Wine and Roses.
Yes.
Want to play that?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. I bring it in.
Yep.
Oh no, you bring it in. It's your video. You bring it in. You bring it in. Perfect. Thank you very much, Tommy. That was
Pleasure.
great.
That
was great.
Okay, thank you.